Hello everybody, welcome to the video. My name is Midway and today I bring you the UI tour or the updated UI guide for any of those that want to get any specific parts of my UI or the entire thing if you so desire. I'll give you all the resources down in the description. We'll talk about it in a second, but before we get into it, please drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. I really appreciate it, and now let's get into it. So let's begin by dumping the entire list of all the add-ons that I use. There it is. You can see it's absolutely massive. There's a lot of add-ons. There's not that many actually, but you know, it's quite big, and I'm sure a lot of these you already know. It's not that important. A lot of these are also not related to combat, but those are the ones that I'm using right now. If you want to get the entirety of what I use as my UI, I'm not just gonna give you the file. That's not something I can easily do. I could, but that would be very huge and there would be a lot of different individual files, so that's not really feasible, but you can just go ahead and grab whatever you think that you might want for your UI out of this list. I'm not really going to be able to explain all of this stuff because there's just way too many add-ons. There's way too much time investment into configuring each of them and understanding them and how they work and what do they do. So let's just double into the ones that are the most important here. Let's start with ElvUI, for example. So if you've seen any of my previous videos, you've seen my UI before, you know this is ElvUI. If you don't, well, what you're seeing right now is ElvUI. And if you copy my profile, you will get exactly the same as you were seeing. That is, of course, not counting the WeakAuras and stuff. But let's go through what I am using and I'm not using ElvUI. So I am not using the nameplates, I am instead using Plater. I am also not using the unit frames for group units, that is for arena, for party, for raid. Instead I'm using grid 2, which we will be talking about in a second. Other things that I want to point out is that I got some bars up here that are mouse over hidden, so you gotta mouse over them for them to be actually displayed. That is, for example, the mini menu up here, a bar here on the right with some stuff, and then of course my actual ability bars on here. Now I don't want them to show because I know all my keybinds and there is some stuff that I sometimes have to click, but usually that's not the case and I'd rather not have them showing up because it just looks way cleaner. Now the menu also being up here frees up some space so you can have your details like here looking pretty clean. You don't have anything down here on the right. And something that I want to mention as well is that maybe when you import my profile, it doesn't look exactly the same. Maybe the scale of things is a little bit out of place. So in that case, you would have to go here to General tab in ElvUI and fiddle around with this number, maybe auto scale it, maybe make it into something that just looks nice in your screen, depending on the resolution and the screen size. This might change. I'm also not using the backs because instead I'm using back none, but that is pretty much about what you can expect from my ElvUI profile. If you just copy the string I'll give you, that should be good to go. Now another thing that might happen is that if you're not using the English client, it might not be compatible, maybe it just doesn't straight up work. I think that's an issue that's happened in the past. I don't know if it still happens, but if that's the case, then you might need to use the client in English for my profile to be able to work for you. But yeah, that's the profile. You can always customize it if you want to, and I'm not really gonna get much into detail with it. As I mentioned, I am not using ElvUI for the frames, and that is because I'm instead using grid 2 frames. And yeah, this is what they look like when you are in combat. Well, you would rather see that in a gameplay video, but if you've seen it before, here is what it is. There is some of the frames down here. You can use some spells. For example, when you use Glimmer, the frame will turn green. That's the reason why I started using it instead of ElvUI, because that was not a feature in ElvUI in the past. I don't know if it's now. But you can also see spells like, for example, when you use Freedom, you use Beacons right there, you will see it. Other stuff like, for example, Bubble, Personals and such. It will show a lot of information that you might want to configure. This will already be in the profile that I've given you, of course. And then there will also be some of the stuff like, for example, your blessings and protection and stuff. It's also configured to show information from every other spec, so that's pretty cool. I also have right underneath it the Omni CD add-on configured, so I can see what spells each of the persons in the party have for Mythic Plus and stuff, but that's a whole different add-on in itself. For the sake of ElvUI, I just have these frames, or rather, sorry, grid 2 frames. And I want to mention some of the things that you might want to be fiddling around with. So first of all, here are some of the other sizes for other types of content. Well, if you go into a 30-man, it's going to look like this, and it will also adapt based on the kind of content you are doing. But yeah, for 20 mans, it will also be bigger and stuff. It's not going to be this thin. That is also something you can customize up here in the by rate size, and you can adjust the frame width and height and stuff, but you are gonna have to play around with it. Now, something you need to know if you're gonna be using this add-on is if there is some debuffs, because there's only one slot for like important debuffs you might want to be dispelling and stuff. That's how I like it. In that case, if there is any debuffs that are too annoying and you don't want them being showing up because they're covering something else, then you gotta go to this section here, statuses, debuffs, ignore debuffs, and then you have to add the name of the debuff you don't want to show up, or the spell ID. You can just add it down here, type it in, and then accept, and then that debuff will no longer be showing up if that's something that's annoying you. Also, very important debuffs you might always have showing up on top, you can also come here and add them onto this list. But here's a list of a lot of different types of debuffs. You can also add them manually outside of the already pre-designed lists, and then those debuffs will be showing through the icons, or rather the indicators. These are already set in stone. You could play around them around with them, where things show up. You can see which of these indicators are which. There is a lot of fiddling to do with this add-on, but the most important that I think pretty much everybody should know should be this: the ignore debuffs and the extra important debuffs. You will figure out other stuff as you go, but for now that is what I want you to know. And otherwise, the profile I'm giving you is pretty much already just good enough to play. I've been using it for a long time, barely changing anything. And yeah, for 5 mans that's what it looks like. For 20 mans you can check out some of my videos, it looks a little bit bigger, as I showed at the beginning actually. And yeah, that's great too. Now, getting into nameplates, I use plater nameplates. Once again, if you've been seeing some content in my channel, you probably have seen the nameplates in action, but you can go ahead and grab the profile down there in the description and import it onto here, and just select it once you've imported it. It's literally called my new profile. I didn't really change anything about that, but yep, it is pretty basic, although it shows some cool stuff, but it's nothing too special. It's really just normal bars with some debuffs on top. I like it simple. I don't really want to have too many fancy things on it. And that's pretty much about it. I use big debuffs if I want to track something important. For example, if there is a HOTS, there you go, you can see the HOTS debuff, but there's also the big debuff there because I've HOTS something. So that's a different add-on that is big debuffs. But if you want to get my profile, pretty simple, pretty basic, just go ahead and grab that on the description. So getting into the meat and bones of my UI is the WeakAuras, of course. If you want to get my UI profile or my WeakAuras, my pack for Dragonflight, that has recently been updated. It should be up to date. I'll give you the link down in the description, of course. And there's not much here to explain. It's just the WeakAuras that you've seen in the different videos. If you've seen any, you could customize anything you want, but it's pretty much covering everything you might need for Holy Paladin. If you want something else, you could always add it, remove it, ignore it, load it, not load it. You can see I still have things like Door of Shadows that I haven't really taken out, but it's not loading and stuff like that. So it's not the most optimized, but it works just fine. It doesn't have any Lua errors. There is some errors on some other WeakAuras that I use. For example, my potions WeakAuras that I have right here. That WeakAura might cause some errors at the beginning because when it loads the icons, it seems to be doing it a little bit weird. But there you go. You can have the exact same WeakAura setup as I have right here. It will of course adapt and change when you change talents. It's not really working too well with Prot and Red. I haven't done the changes for that coming into Dragonflight, so you might have some issues. But yeah, you will pretty much have the same thing as I do have right here. And if that's all you want, you can just get it down in the description. Any questions, of course, always, you can drop them down below. But anything about developing a WeakAura and stuff, that will always, of course, be a bit more of an effort. So probably something you could do in a stream instead. Now, if you want any of my other WeakAuras that are not just my Holy Paladin WeakAuras, of course, I have a lot of them, and some of them will be included in the WeakAura spreadsheet. So down there in the description, there will be a spreadsheet. That is going to take you to a lot of the links for the WeakAuras that you can see in the screen. So for example, if you want to get a combat timer, you can get that. I use that a lot, or well, pretty much always. Some of this stuff, I don't really know what it does. It's been there forever. Other stuff, for example, my dragon riding UI, it replaces the default UI and it looks neater, and you can also get information for the speed you're going at. Stuff like list of externals on me, this is pretty handy sometimes. You can see if something's been used on you. Also, it just shows you if it's on you, for example, like you still have your freedom on and stuff like that. For example, raid ability timeline, something very useful for raiding in particular, but also for Mythic Plus. If you have the right add-ons for it, you need to be using big wicks or little wicks. It will show the spells on a timeline, and it's pretty cool. You don't have a big cluttery set of bars in your screen, so you can just have this instead and just see when abilities are happening. Ultimate mouse cursor, very useful. It's just going to show this big ass circle in the middle of the screen whenever you are, on your cursor. It's also going to show stuff like the GCD, the cast bar and stuff. It's pretty handy. It helps a lot to not lose where your cursor is. For example, when you right click, it's still going to stay there. So when you take the right click off, it's going to remain on the screen. Very useful. Found myself needing that quite a lot whenever there was just a lot of things happening on the screen. Other stuff that I'm using, for example, my potion WeakAuras, I already talked about it. Player stats, just for the stream, so it can show up there. Something very important, for example, is dungeons targeted spells, so it shows onto the frames. It's not going to show here, but it's going to show onto the frames, like the cast of the spell that the mob is doing onto who's doing it. It doesn't always work properly. Sometimes it doesn't actually show it on the person that's going to be casted on. But if you see, like, for example, I don't know, a shadow bolt from something in Shadow Moon, it's going to be casted onto something. You would see the icon and the time, like it would like do a pizza thing, like it would be closing down as the cast is finishing, so you know, oh well, this person is gonna get hit, so I need to time my heal on them if I want them to be topped up as soon as possible after. So very important to get that one. Of course, getting any pack of WeakAuras for any dungeons it's always going to be pretty much a must. So for example, for Dragonflight, there's a big ass WeakAura pack that I'm using here. There will also be another one for the raid as well, of course. And there's also this WeakAura that I'm using, spell CDs on Nameplate. Pretty handy, very important if you are, I don't know, I don't really want to say very important, but it's pretty handy. It's gonna show the time, the remaining cooldown on spells on the enemy mobs in Mythic Plus. So if you go into any mob and they have a cast and you interrupt it, it's gonna show you how long until the cast is able to be casted again. So pretty much you can save your kick until that thing's gonna happen again, and yeah, make sure you kick it. So that's pretty much all I really want to show you. Again, if you have any questions, any more specific things that you might want to know, you can go ahead and drop them in the comments. Again, the UI is absolutely massive. There's a lot of hours and work put into it, so anything that you want to know that's not been talked about here, you can just go ahead and ask me. I will provide it if I remember about it or if I can. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you find it useful. Please drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.